Did you know from the beginning that this was not just you speaking with your own subconscious or a part of your own mind? Did you immediately know that this was another intelligence outside of your own brain?
Right, right. That's the big question, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
people who aren't into this kind of stuff will always lean on that. Like, oh, it's a hallucination. Your crazy
Yeah.
brain is making all kinds of whirly gigs and colors and everything. and and I get that. I understand that, especially from my previous mindset that was just very like clinical skeptic, science or bust kind of a viewpoint. Like it's very comfortable, that sort of perspective. And I in my college days, I was trying a few different psychedelics and a few other things, and I was partying a little bit too, and I had experiences with other things where I could tell very distinctly, oh, this is very clearly like my subconscious. It's very specific to me. Um, it's like thoughts that I've had in the past are looping, or cartoon characters from, the world here are, coming through, and it feels very clear. That's something I've told friends or, homies about just these types of experiences, is when you're there and this is actually happening, it feels like, okay, yeah, I'm in another reality, like without a doubt, even though we've never been into another reality. So what does that feel like, right? But when you're there, it's like, okay, I'm in the pool now. I'm like, awakening at a dinner table, and there's people around the dinner table here that I recognize like from thousands of years ago all of a sudden. And the astral reality is starting to like return to my astral body, and I'm actually starting to remember everything. Like it starts to come back to you as soon as you enter back into those spaces. And then you come right back again, and it's like, okay, I'm back here. I remember one experience. It was so funny. The space around me shifted into this other holographic room, and I was thinking, okay, where am I now? And it actually took me, about 20 seconds to realize, oh, I'm back in my living room. I went from this astral holographic landscape of this frequency and got tuned into this layer of the holographic experience of this reality that we're used to on the day to day. People, I think, are quick to think of these as separate spaces, like, oh, you're up in the astral and you're here in the material. But they're all holographic realms, they're all this sort of astral landscape. Simply the thickness of the light and the material itself is just on a different radio channel.
Right. It's just different frequencies. So you believe, and I happen to believe this too, that whenever you are experiencing the effects of these plant medicines or psychedelics, that it actually shifts your frequency to where you can perceive these different dimensions or realities, right?
Yes, yes, and I think it's the substances themselves preside in those radio stations. Like that is
Mm,
their day to day
right, right, right.
vibration and frequency. And our body is actually set up in that way that, the things that we consume, we become one with those things, right? So it's actually a very ancient relationship. I think that's if we knew the heritage behind the receptor sites in our brain, that marriage between certain chemical compounds that are vibrating at a certain rate, sitting in a certain location in the brain, that then elicits the frequency of our perspective to then elevate, or descend, or it's more of an outwards, inwards kind of thing. Even it's different than simply up or down, really. Um, that's part of our natural makeup. We have a very ancient relationship with all of these molecular compounds. If we only knew, the true history behind it, we'd probably be surprised to know oh, this has been part of the human history and part of our physical body since the very beginning.
Right. Now, I want to hear about some of the most profound experiences. Now, you told us about your first experiences. Talk a little bit about some of the information that was presented to you and some of the things you learned through some of the most profound experiences that you've had.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I'll start off with let's start off with this one. So I always wondered, how did the universe come to be? That's always been in the back of my head. And so what started happening when I sort of got into this as like a actual practice is I learned how to recall my experiences. It's actually a simple statement of intention at the beginning that I will recall the change into whatever my experience is going to be. I'm going to recall everything that happens, and then I'm going to tell it back to myself when I've returned.
Now, I don't want to I don't mean to interrupt. I just have to ask, is this all through DMT or was it different types of plant medicines?
Yeah, I had tried different plant medicines. The most intense experiences I have had is through DMT.
Right.
And then I've had other experiences with other psychedelics as well. And I know to the naysayers that that's going to be like, oh, geez, forget this guy. But I will say, if you're approaching these things as a sacred sacrament, that's like an occasional thing, that's like how people will go off to a silence retreat in the mountains to get away from it all. That was sort of my relationship with these things.
Right.
So what's been interesting about trying the different approaches to basically peek through the gates or peek through the veil, so to speak, is that I've been able to see different angles of the other side through trying different approaches to it, which has actually formed a fuller picture for me. So that's sort of in the background of me telling these stories. Is sometimes you see things this way from this angle, sometimes you see things this way from this angle. That whole idea of piecing the puzzle together, right? So this experience, like I said, I have my process of remembrance where I intend to remember everything that's going to happen. And then I would have very specific intentions about what I wanted to know, while also sort of leaving things open. You don't want to be too in your head either, the middle way, the narrow way, that sort of balanced approach towards things. You're actively engaged with your mind, but not so much so where you're getting too heady with everything. And you're emotionally involved and open, but you're also protected and keeping yourself like balanced and closed off only to a certain extent to keep things safe. Really into like the golden mean, the middle way, and the narrow path. I think those are very solid spiritual sort of concepts after all these experiences. So getting in the zone, getting in there, and what came through is like, oh, you've always wondered about how the universe was created. Okay, here it is. So close my eyes, I go in, and this presence that was with me, when psychically communicating, because here's the other thing. This is a big reason I wanted to get on your show and talk to your wonderful fan base here, is I could feel, being in these experiences and being in these spaces, that every human soul will be in these places at one point or another. Most likely when people die. It's most likely where we all came from before incarnating into a human body. So we will all return to the great beyond one way or another. And so the things that are happening to me and the things that I've come across, it's going to eventually some point down the track, it's going to be everybody going through these experiences. So this one started out with just a gray space. And that's right. I wanted to mention the telepathic communication. When people do find themselves out there one way or the other, telepathy just works.
Yes. I can tell that 100%. Every communication that I had with an entity, all telepathic. It was just immediate. Before I could even finish a question, it'd be answered like right away. It was amazing. But yeah.
There's nothing to it. There's nothing. It's completely intuitive. It seems like it's built in. Actually, forming words and putting a sentence together is more complicated. You're adding extra steps. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yes.
And that even came up with another experience I'll tell you about. These entities were like, they were like, can we examine this process you're doing where you're taking your consciousness and forming it into these like little word structures and then like telling it to yourself? Like they were fascinated by that, right? Because it was like this different way of communication.